Hello everyone, my name is Rishabh. Welcome to day 198 of our book Learning Journey. Today's book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, Oliver Sacks. Topic, The Strange World of the Human Brain. What neurological disorders teach us about identity, perception, and consciousness. Today, we are moving into a completely new category neuroscience, perception, and the mystery of human consciousness. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that you can see perfectly, but you can no longer recognize familiar faces or objects. You can see a face, but you don't know whose face it is. You can look at your own hand, but somehow it doesn't feel like part of you. You can hear someone's voice, but you cannot recognize who is speaking. Or imagine being able to remember almost everything that happened decades ago, while being unable to form a new memory today. This situation sounds almost impossible, but neurologist and writer Oliver Sacks encountered people experiencing extraordinary neurological conditions throughout his career. His book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, presents a collection of clinical stories involving patients whose perception, memory, movement, language, and sense of identity had been dramatically altered by neurological disorders. The book is fascinating because Sachs doesn't simply describe symptoms. He asks a much deeper questions. What does the human brain actually do to create our experience of reality? We normally think seeing means simply receiving information through our eyes. But the book shows that vision is much more complicated. We think memory is simply storing information. But memory is much more complicated. We think identity is something permanent. But neurological disorders reveals that identity depends on many different systems working together. The central lesson of today's book is the human brain doesn't simply record reality. It actively constructs our experience of reality. And when different brain systems are disrupted, completely different vision of reality can emerge. Let's explore this extraordinary book. Lesson 1. Seeing is not the same as understanding. One of the most fascinating ideas in the book is that vision isn't simply about eyesight. Your eye receives information, but your brain has to interpret that information. Imagine looking at a cup. Your eyes detect its shape, color, edges, and position. But your brain does not, but your brain does something much more sophisticated. It identifies that's a cup. It understands that the object can hold liquid. It recognizes its relationship to other objects. It knows how you might pick it up. So, seeing is actually a collaboration between sensory information and interpretation. This explains why someone can have functioning eyes but still have severe problems recognizing objects. The problem isn't necessarily the eyes. The problem can be in the brain's interpretation system. Lesson 2. Perception is an active process. We often imagine the brain as a camera. The world exists. The eyes record it. The brain stores the picture. But the reality is much more interesting. Your brain constantly interprets incomplete information. It predicts, it compares, it categorizes, it uses previous experience, it fills gaps. This means your experience of reality is partially constructed. A partly construction. Construct. This means your experience of reality is partly constructed. You aren't simply seeing the world, your brain is creating a meaningful representation of the world. That's why two people can experience the same situation differently. Their brains bring different memories, expectation, experiences, and emotional association to the same information. Lesson 3. Identity is more complex than we think. Who you are. Your answer might be, my name is Rishabh. But identity is much more than a name. It includes memory, personality, habits, relationships, emotions, values, body awareness, language, personal history. If one part of the brain is damaged, one aspect of identity can change while other remains intact. A person may remember childhood but lose the ability to create new memories. Someone may recognize objects but struggle to recognize faces. Someone may speak fluently but lose the ability to understand certain forms of language. These cases demonstrate something profound. The self may be composed of many interacting systems rather than one single central mechanism. Lesson 4. The brain works like a new network. Lesson 4. The brain works like a network. Think about a modern organization. You have HR, operations, sales, technology. Each department performs a different function, but the organization works because the departments interact. The brain is somewhat similar. Different systems perform different functions. Some process visual information, some handle language, some handle movement, some process memory, some regulate emotion. Some help to recognize ourselves and others. When one system becomes damaged, the rest of the brain may continue functioning. This explains why neurological disorders can produce very specific changes. A person can be highly intelligent yet have a very specific difficulty. The problem isn't that the entire brain has stopped working. One important system has been disrupted. Lesson 5. Memory is not one single thing. We often say, she has a good memory. But memory isn't a single ability. There are different forms of memory. You can remember facts, you can remember experiences, you can remember skills, you can recognize similar, yeah, you can recognize familiar people. You can remember how to ride a bicycle. You can remember emotional associations. These different types of memory depends on different processes. This explains why someone can lose one type of memory while preserving another. A person might not remember learning a skill, yet still perform the skill. That seems strange, but it demonstrates how sophisticated the brain really is. Wow. A person might not remember learning a skill, yet still perform the skill. That seems strange, but it demonstrates how sophisticated the brain really is. Lesson 6. Memory creates continuity. Imagine waking up early morning without remembering the previous day. Imagine waking up early morning. Oh, sorry. Lesson 6. Memory creates continuity. Imagine waking up every morning without remembering the previous day. You would still have a personality. You would still have emotions. You could still interact with people. But your sense of personal continuity would be disrupted. Memory connects who you were, who you were with who you are, and who you expect to become. That's why memory is closely connected to identity. Your personal story helps create your sense of self. Without continuity, life can become fragmented. Lesson 7. Language is more than speaking. Communication looks simple. You speak, someone listens, they understand, but the brain has to perform an enormous amount of work. It must, it must recognize sounds, separate words, interpret meaning, understand grammar, connect language with memory, recognize context, generate responses. This is why neurological damage can affect language in different ways. Someone may be able to speak fluently but struggle to understand. Another person may understand language but have difficulty producing speech. Again, the brain isn't one single machine. It is a collection of specialized systems working together. Lesson 8. Music can reach parts of the brain that words cannot. One of the fascinating aspects of neurological condition is that certain abilities can remain surprisingly strong even when others decline. Music is a powerful example. A person may struggle with ordinary conversation but still recognize a familiar melody. Someone may forget a person's name but recognizes their voice. This reminds us that human cognition is not organized in one simple hierarchy. Different pathways can preserve different parts of experience. Music, emotion, memory, and movement can become deeply connected. That's one reason music can sometimes evoke memories with extraordinary intensity. Lesson 9. The brain can construct a sense of the body. We normally assume we automatically know where our body is. You close your eyes and raise your hand. You still know where it is. This ability is called body awareness. The brain constantly receives information from muscles, joints, skin, vision, and balance systems. It combines these signals to create an internal representation of your body. When those systems malfunction, a person can experience remarkably unusual changes in body awareness. This teaches us something fascinating. Even the feeling of being inside your own body is something the brain actively constructs, constructs. Lesson 10. Neurology reveals how normal experience work. Here's one of the most important ideas in the book. We often learn how a system works by studying what happens when part of it breaks. Imagine a machine. If you remove one component and observe what stops working, you learn what that component was responsible for. Neurological disorders can provide a similar window into the brain. When one ability disappears while others remain, scientists can, being, scientists can begin understanding which brain systems contribute to that ability. In this sense, illness can unintentionally reveal the architecture of normal human cognition. Lesson 11. Intelligence is not one simple ability. We often describe someone as very intelligent. But what does that mean? Someone may be excellent at mathematics but struggle socially. Someone may have extraordinary artistic ability but difficulty with planning. Someone may have exceptional memory for music but difficulty with everyday tasks. Someone may be highly articulate but poor at recognizing faces. The book challenges the idea that intelligence is one single thing. Human ability are multidimensional. This is important in education and workplaces. A person who struggles in one area may possess extraordinary strengths somewhere else. Lesson 12. Applying this to the workplace. Now, let's connect neuroscience to everyday work. Imagine a manager sees an employee making repeated mistakes. The manager may think this person is careless. But perhaps the problem is actually the system. Maybe maybe the instructions are unclear. Maybe the workflow creates too much cognition load. Maybe the employee has to remember too many steps. Maybe information is presented in a confusing way. Understanding how human cognition works can therefore improve workplace design. Good systems should account for attention, memory, perception, fatigue, distraction, decision making. Human beings are machines. Systems should be designed around human cognitive limitations. Lesson 13. Why good interfaces matters. This connects beautifully with what we learned in day 196 about human-centered design. If a dashboard contains 20 complicated options, the brain has to process them. If important information is buried, attention is wasted. If employees must remember long consequences, error increase. Neuroscience therefore supports an important design principle. Reduce unnecessary cognitive effort. Good interfaces makes important information visible. They organize information logically. They minimize unnecessary choices. They give clear feedback. The best system isn't necessarily the one with the most features. It's the one that allows the human brain to accomplish the goal efficiently. Lesson 14. what this means for artificial intelligence. AI systems are becoming increasingly capable, but AI doesn't experience the world exactly as humans do. Human intelligence involves perception, memory, emotion, bodily awareness, social understanding, and subjective experience. When we build AI systems, we should therefore be careful about assuming if a machine can process information, it understands the world exactly like a human. Human cognition is far more complicated. Studying neuroscience can help AI developers understand what makes biological intelligence different. It can also inspire new approaches to machine learning and human computer interaction. Lesson 15. A neurological condition does not define the whole person. Perhaps the most human lesson from Oliver Sacks is that a diagnosis doesn't describe an entire person. A person may have a neurological disorder, but they still have memories, preferences, emotions, relationships, talents, personality, dignity. Six, clinical storytelling repeatedly reminds us to see the person, not simply the condition. This is an important lesson far beyond medicine. Whenever we interact with someone who struggles in one area, we should avoid reducing them to that weaknesses. We should avoid reducing them to that weaknesses. A person's limitation is only one part of their identity. Lesson 16. The brain is still full of mysteries. We have learned an extraordinary amount about neuroscience, but enormous question remains. How does consciousness emerge? Why do we experience a continuous sense of self? How does memory become personal experience? How does the brain produce creativity? How does emotion influence perception? How does subjective experience emerge from biological processes? We have many theories, but we don't have complete answers. And that uncertainty is exciting. Science becomes interesting precisely because there are still questions left to answer. Science becomes interesting precisely because there are still questions left to answer. What we learn from the man who mistook his wife for a hat. This book teaches us seeing is different from understanding. Perception is actively constructed by the brain. Identity depends on multiple cognitive systems. Memory is not one single ability. Language involves multiple specialized processes. Music can connect deeply with memory and emotion. The brain constantly constructs body awareness. Neurological disorders can reveal how normal cognition works. Intelligence is multidimensional. Human limitations should influence system and interface design. Cognitive load affects workplace performance. AI and neuroscience offer interesting complementary perspectives. A person's condition should never be confused with their entire identity. The human brain remains one of science's greatest mysteries. Core closing message. If there is one lesson we should remember from the man who mistook his wife for a hat, It is this: what we experience as ordinary reality is actually the result of an extraordinary amount of invisible work happening inside the brain. You wake up, you recognize your surroundings, you recognize your own face, you understand language, you remember yesterday, you know where your body is, you recognize the people who love, you know who you are, and because these abilities usually work automatically, we rarely think about how remarkable they are. But neurological disorders reveal just how complicated these everyday experiences really are. The brain isn't simply a storage device. It isn't simply a camera. It isn't simply a calculator. It is a dynamic system constantly interpreting the world and constructing our experience of reality. And perhaps that is the most humbling lesson of all. We still don't completely understand the organ that allows us to understand everything else. We still don't completely understand the organ that allows us to understand everything else. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and never take ordinary human experience for granted. Because sometimes the things we experience every second are the most extraordinary things of all. Thank you.